Hi everyone. Thanks for joining me for True Crime and Whatnot. I want to throw out a quick apology for taking so long to get this one out. I've actually been researching it, and this one's a long one. So I apologize ahead of time because, as most of you know, if you're a returning listener, then you know that I've begun researching each state for the first documented serial killer in that state. And yeah, my 12-year-old niece picked Florida. And so we're just gonna grab the sunscreen and head on down to sunny Florida and find out who the first serial killer was and how that affected things. Warning. The following story depicts graphic details of crime scenes and rape. Viewer discretion is advised. Gerard John Schaefer Jr. was born March 26, 1945 in Neenah, Wisconsin. He was the oldest child of Gerard John Schaefer Sr. and Doris Marie Runcie Schaefer. He had a brother and a sister. His mother was a housewife, while his dad was a traveling salesman. He was raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia, until his family finally settled in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in 1960, when he was 15. He described his childhood as troubled and turbulent, mainly because of the frequency of moving that came with his father's job, as well as his father's alcoholism and constant verbal abuse. He believed his sister was his father's favorite child because, in his mind, she was typically the only person he didn't yell at or belittle. However, he was very close to his mother, and he attended St. Thomas Aquinas High School. I hope I said that right. After the move to Florida, his fellow students, they couldn't really remember him being part of any specific groups in school. He just tended to pursue his own interests alone. He specifically liked fishing and hunting, and his family and most friends viewed him as an outdoorsman. By the time he was 12 years old, he started to experiment with sadomasochism and bondage. He often wished that he was a girl because he believed his father would not be so abusive had he been a girl. By his early teens, he developed erotic fantasies of hurting women that he felt were worthy of his contempt. His fantasies got to the point where he was actually tying himself to trees in rural locations. By his mid-teens, he was a peeping Tom, and it was known that he liked to cross-dress. But according to his high school teachers, he was a promising student, a member of the varsity football team during his sophomore and junior years, and was also an excellent golfer. He graduated high school in June of 1964. He worked for a short time as a fishing guide in the Everglades before he enrolled at Broward Community College. In 1966, he attempted to become a member of the priesthood, but was denied due to having a lack of faith. So this was when he upgraded to animal cruelty. Shortly after his denial into the priesthood, he left the Catholic religion altogether. On October 2nd, 1966, he kidnapped, molested, and murdered 20-year-old Nancy Leichner and 21-year-old Pamela Nader while they were out with their boyfriends at the lake at Alexander Springs Park. The two had gone missing after they went for a walk on one of the trails while their boyfriends were swimming. It was believed for quite a while that the two drowned. In December of 1968, he married, but it would be a very short-lived marriage. His wife filed for divorce, stating his extreme cruelty was the reason for the separation. The divorce was finalized May 2nd, 1970. In March of 1969, he applied for a student teaching internship at Plantation High School. His internship began September 23rd, 1969, with him mostly teaching geography. He was fired on November 7th because he refused advice from his supervisors, and he constantly tried to impose his personal morals and political beliefs on his students. In March of 1970, he received an internship with Stranahan High School, once again teaching geography. According to superiors there, he was, and I quote, arrogant and very limited in knowledge of the subject taught, end quote. He was fired 7 weeks after the internship began. This would end his teaching career. Shortly after his teaching career ended, he did some international traveling and then came back home and worked as a security guard while he tried to figure out what he was going to do next. Forgive the noise in the background. My cat has found a box and he's playing with it. In January of 1971, while working as a security guard, he met 19-year-old secretary Teresa Dean. The couple married on September 11th, 1971, in Fort Lauderdale. Also in September, he applied for an open position with the Wilton Manors Police Department as a police officer. Now, on his resume, he never said anything about recently being fired from 2 jobs. Instead, he said he got 2 years' experience as a research assistant and had recently returned from Morocco. He had recently returned from Morocco. That's one of the places that he had traveled to. But he was not a research assistant. He was on vacation. And apparently, back then, they didn't verify work history. And I'm probably guessing he's the reason they do now. He graduated the police academy by the end of 1971 as a patrolman. While working as a patrolman for Wilton Manors Police Department, Schaefer would stop vehicles driven by women committing minor traffic violations. He would then enter their plates into a database to obtain personal information on them, and then later he would call them and ask them out for a date. Can you imagine that? I laugh because it's disgusting, and that's unfortunately my response to inappropriate situations. I tend to laugh. After it was discovered by his supervisors. He was dismissed from the department, which was about 6 months into his law enforcement career. But unbeknownst to the department, he had been searching for a better paying law enforcement job, and he accepted a position with the Martin County Sheriff's Department. He began the new job on June 23rd, 1972, after forging a letter of recommendation from the Wilton Manor Police Department. At that time, they only did standard background checks on applicants just to make sure they didn't have a criminal background. So, again, I think he's probably one of the reasons why they do such an extensive background now. On July 21st, 1972, he encountered 2 teenage girls who were hitchhiking. They were 19-year-old Nancy Ellen Trotter and 17-year-old Paula Sue Wells. He then drove them to their intended destination, and he was actually on duty while doing this. And while on the way, he gave them a lecture about the dangers of hitchhiking and what could happen. And during the conversation, he discovered that neither one of the girls was a Florida native, and they really wanted to go to Jensen Beach the next day. He offered to drive them to keep them from hitchhiking, and the girls accepted the offer. Why wouldn't you? He's a police officer, and he was only like 25 or 26, so he was close to their age. They agreed to meet up at the bandstand on East Ocean Boulevard at 9:15 a.m. the next day. When he showed up at the intended time, he was not in uniform or in a police cruiser. When the girls asked why, he said he was doing undercover work and was using an unmarked vehicle. After everyone got in the car and they started on their merry way, he changed the route that they were going to take, telling the girls he wanted to show them an old Spanish fort on Hutchinson Island. He continued to lecture the girls about the dangers of accepting rides from strangers and the chances of being sold into white slavery. He stopped near a dilapidated shed deep inside a remote forest where he handcuffed and gagged the girls. He took one girl to a large cypress tree close to the Indian River, tying her legs to the trunk of the tree just below the knee. Then he tied a noose around her neck and secured it to a tree branch in a way that would force her to stand on exposed roots. He then did a similar process with the second girl, taking her to a different tree. He told both girls they were to be raped and murdered. But after he finished tying the second girl up, he got an urgent radio call telling him to report to the station immediately. He left both girls tied up and vowed he would return, which he did. 2 hours later, to his surprise, the girls had escaped. Now you would think your response would be to get away from the area. Did he do that? No, he did not. He immediately went home, called his supervisor, who was the sheriff, and he told him, and this is a quote, "I've done something very foolish. You'll be mad at me." Then he explained he only wanted to teach the girls a lesson, but he overdid it. So Sheriff Crowder and Lieutenant Melvin Waldron went to State Road A1A, where they found a very desperate, partially gagged girl with her hands tied to her back, swimming via flutter kick in a subtropical river. Once they removed her gag, she identified herself as Nancy Trotter. When she asked about her friend, they let her know that Paula had been found staggering out of the forest by a truck driver who brought her directly to the station about 45 minutes prior to them finding her. Both girls gave detailed accounts of their attacker and his vehicle, and Schaefer repeatedly said that he just overreacted in his efforts in showing the girls the dangers of hitchhiking. And no one believed him? At that point, he was immediately dismissed from the force and arrested, with Sheriff Crowder instructing the other deputies that he was to be charged with false imprisonment and aggravated assault. 2 weeks later, he posted his $15,000 bail, which meant he was free to roam the streets until his trial in November of 1972. Now, what would a person do during their free time while they're waiting to be tried for abduction? Well, he abducted a 17-year-old Susan Carol Place and 16-year-old Georgia Marie Jessup on September 27th, 1972. They were all going to an adult education class together, and he introduced himself as Jerry Shepard, claiming he was from Colorado. The very afternoon they disappeared, they introduced him to Susan's mother, Lucille, who had come home to find her daughter cleaning up her bedroom, while Georgia just sat on a chair. The trio told Lucille they were going to go to Fort Lauderdale to the beach to play guitar. Lucille was extremely suspicious of Jerry, despite the fact that he tried to calm her fears by telling her that his intentions were noble. She didn't buy it, so she wrote the license plate number down to his 1969 Datsun. That evening, the trio left around 8:45 p.m. When Susan had not come home for 4 days, Lucille called Georgia's mother, Shirley, only to find out that her daughter had run away on September 27th, and she had not heard from either girl. They reported the girls missing to the Oakland Park Police Department, and Lucille gave them the license plate number and a description of the car and man they left with. The registration to the vehicle traced back to a completely different vehicle, owned completely different person in St. Petersburg, who looked nothing like Jerry Shepard. The original owner also had a firm alibi for the date of the disappearance. Also, the only Jerry Shepard registered in Fort Lauderdale was also cleared, and so the case went cold. In the meantime, 14-year-old Mary Alice Bruscolina and 13-year-old Elsie Lena Farmer vanished while hitchhiking to a restaurant from a motel nearly a month after Susan Place and Georgia Jessup disappeared. Their bodies were found in undergrowth close to Sunrise Boulevard near Plantation, Florida, in early 1973. Mary Alice had been beaten severely around the head, with one specific blow proving fatal. Several of her fingernails had been torn from her fingers, while Elsie had also been bludgeoned to death. After the police questioned Mary Alice's friends, detectives found that she and Elsie frequented a Lauderdale-by-the-Sea apartment rented by Mary Alice's older sister's boyfriend. And a guy named Gary Shepard was someone that Mary Alice had befriended. Several people identified Gary Shepard to be Gerard Schaefer. In December 1972, Schaefer appeared in court in relation to the abduction of Trotter and Wells. Because a plea bargain had been set, he was allowed to plead guilty to only one charge of aggravated assault and was sentenced to 1 year in jail with the possibility of parole in 6 months, followed by 3 years of probation. When he was sentenced, the judge stated that it was beyond the imagination of the court how foolish he had been during the entire case. After stating that, the judge then postponed his sentence until after the holidays. While leaving the courtroom, Schaefer was quoted as telling reporters, "I made a stupid mistake. There was no sex. No one was hurt." Personally, I feel like that was more of him stating a regret than him trying to make himself seem innocent, but that's my opinion. This whole court case really made me mad. If you can't tell by my voice, it got to me. This whole situation got to me. But the fact that he only got 1 year jail sentence with the possibility of parole after 6 months, and then they postponed it until after the first of the year, it just really irritates me. I don't think there should be allowed to be a postponement of a sentence. I think once you're found guilty, you go straight to jail. You start serving that sentence right then. Doesn't matter how severe the case is. I still feel like you should still do that time. But that's my opinion. He started his sentence on January 15th, 1973. However, on January 11th, 1973, Colette Marie Goodenough and Barbara Ann Wilcox, both 19, disappeared while hitchhiking from Sioux City, Iowa to Florida. They were last seen alive in Biloxi, Mississippi. At that same time, Schaefer had made a call to his home in Florida from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Skeletal remains were found scattered close to a large tree and an orange crate in January 1977. They had been bound together by baling wire, and impressions found on the branches of the tree, along with the positioning of the orange crate, indicated one or both girls had been suspended from the tree as their murderer sat or stood on the crate. In March of 1973, Lucille Place found a letter in her daughter's bedroom that was from Jerry Shepard. She drove to the return address and spoke to the doorman. He informed her that the person who lived at the address was Gerard Schaefer, and that he had just been sentenced to a year in jail for the abduction and attempted hanging of 2 girls. As she and her husband were driving around, she noticed the numbers on the license plates were very similar to the ones she wrote down, with one number difference. She realized the officers may have written down the incorrect number she originally gave them. When she brought this to their attention, they ran the original number, which came back to Gerard Schaefer at the address she had just left. The reason I'm not giving the address is because it could be someone else's address now, and for privacy purposes, I'm not going to put that out there. When Schaefer was questioned about the girls, he denied any knowledge of them or of Lucille Place, even though she and her husband were able to positively identify him as Jerry Shepard. On April 1st, a father and son looking for aluminum cans found the very decomposed remains of two individuals scattered within and around a hole dug among trees in Oak Hammock Park in Port St. Lucie. The grave was 212 feet from the dirt road. It was approximately 2 feet 3 inches deep. Deep scratch marks were evident at the base of the tree immediately alongside the grave, close to where sections of torso had been bound to the trunk. One victim wore remnants of blue jeans with a circular emblem of the road runner on them. The other victim was completely nude, a pile of clothing discarded in nearby undergrowth. The location was 6 miles from where Trotter and Wells had been held captive the previous summer. One set of remains, later identified as Susan Place, sustained a gunshot wound to the jaw with a .22 caliber pistol. The initials GJ had been carved into a tree trunk, the roots of which had deep knife, machete, or axe incisions and contained torn pieces of clothing fibers. Dental records would positively identify both girls as Susan Place and Georgia Jessup on April 5th. When Schaefer was informed of the identification a short time later, he immediately requested a public defender. Because of the location, the identities of the victims, and the similar motive to the abduction of Trotter and Wells, Broward County and Martin County Sheriff's Departments were able to obtain search warrants for his home and vehicle, as well as his mother's home in Fort Lauderdale. While searching a locked bedroom in his mother's home in Fort Lauderdale, investigators discovered 300 pages of lurid stories he had written and illustrated over the years. Through these writings and narratives, he was able to relive his various fetishes and twisted fantasies that he subjected his victims to, and even continued to play out his fantasies weeks after the murders. Also found in his mother's home were 11 guns, bags filled with live and spent ammo, 13 hunting knives, sections of rope, and porn. Images recovered included 37 black and white Polaroid pictures depicting women being hung and or mutilated, and photos of Schaefer in women's clothing simulating his own hanging. Inside a gold jewelry box, they found jewelry, passports, and clothing belonging to several teenage girls and young women. Some items investigators were unable to link to missing or murdered individuals, like a heart-shaped charm with the initials of MTN inscribed on it. A locket with the name Lee on it was determined to belong to a missing woman named Lee Hanlon Bonadies, who just so happened to be a neighbor of Schaefer's when they were teenagers. She had gone missing in September of 1969. Teeth belonging to at least 8 victims were also taken from the home. All of that was just in Broward County. So now, let's just mosey on to Martin County. The April 6th search of Schaefer's home produced much less physical evidence. However, they did recover 2 human teeth kept in a plastic capsule in the master bedroom, several knives and firearms inside a shed, and a very bloody white pillowcase that had been washed. Also, Georgia Jessup's distinctive suede purse was discovered in Schaefer's wife's possession, which she claimed was given to her as a gift from her husband around November of 1972. He tried to get her and her brother Henry to get rid of it after the discovery of Susan in Georgia, claiming the police may use it to make up evidence against him. So instead, Henry gave the purse to the police. By May 12th, there was enough physical and circumstantial evidence to link him to 9 murders and unsolved disappearances between 1969 and 1973. On May 14th, Chief Investigator Lem Brumley Jr. stated during a press conference that in terms of scope and bizarreness, this case was the largest he had seen in his career. On May 18th, Schaefer was formally charged with first-degree murder of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. He was held without bond, then transferred to Florida State Hospital to undergo 30 days of psychiatric exams before being returned to St. Lucie Jail on June 20th. The exams revealed Schaefer to be suffering from paranoia, psychosis, and acute sexual deviation, who viewed himself as an eliminator of women he deemed immoral. But he was still mentally competent to stand trial. Dr. Benjamin Ogburn's exact words were, "There has been evidence of considerable paranoid feelings, hostility, and anger, which erupts with little stress. It is noted past examiners have also seen this patient as representing a character disorder. In addition, there appears to be a very active fantasy life. He is considered to be a very dangerous person, both to himself and to others." Schaefer's trial started September 17th, 1973. Since Jessup and Place were murdered during a time when the Florida Supreme Court declared capital punishment unconstitutional, there was a time there where They were very flip-floppy and wishy-washy on it. And this was that time. So because of that, prosecutors aimed for a life sentence. So naturally, he pled not guilty. Even though he testified at his pretrial hearing, he was advised not to testify at the actual trial. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 10 minutes before returning with 2 verdicts of guilty for first-degree murder. The judge formally announced the verdict at 11:05 p.m. He was sentenced to life in prison, although he requested to be sent to a mental institution. Contemporary statutes at the time indicated the possibility of parole after he served 14 to 19 years. But in May of 1979, that was revised and was indicated that parole would be most likely around the year 2016. After his conviction, he maintained his innocence, insisting he was framed by overzealous prosecutors, dirty cops, and his own defense attorney, Elton Schwartz, who, by the way, married Schaefer's second wife in December of 1973. Schaefer was placed solitary confinement on several occasions due to prison mail violations after attempting to get the public to send him female undergarments. In 1983, he assisted in obtaining evidence to secure a conviction of pedophile Mervyn Eric Cross, as well as an individual in Seattle and a teacher in Los Angeles. They were all involved in a child pornography ring. On December 3rd, 1995, Gerard Schaefer was stabbed to death on the floor of his cell. He had been stabbed over 40 times around his face, head, neck, and body, with his throat slashed, his right eye destroyed, and several fractured ribs. 32-year-old Vincent Faustino Rivera killed Schaefer after a supposed argument over who received the final cup of hot water from a dispenser several days before Schaefer's death. Rivera received 53 years and 10 months tacked on to the life plus 20 years that he was already serving for a double homicide that he committed in 1990. Supposedly, Schaefer was actually a narc, and that was the real reason for his murder, but, we'll probably never know. The judge that presided over his trial in the 1970s was quoted as saying, "He's finally gotten the death sentence he deserved, but couldn't be given." At the time of his death, investigators in Broward County were gathering more evidence to charge him with 3 more unsolved murders, in part to ensure that he would never be released from prison. They were not taking any chances. They knew he was dangerous. Due to his death and the fact that he never would tell, the true number of his victims is and will forever be unknown. Some believe he only killed 11, while a periodical released in 1973 had 28 victims on it. Some of the people on that list were found alive, and or they died after he was arrested. So you can't really go off of that periodical. Now, I definitely believe he had more than 11 victims. I think he was a very, very sick person. Yeah, this one just the whole situation angered me, because he shouldn't have been allowed to be out during that time period. I know that they didn't realize that he was a killer at the time, but looking back, and I know the judges are probably, they were probably doing the same thing. Looking back, he shouldn't have been released, because how many did he kill in the states that he traveled while he was free? Because if you'll remember, he went to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's on the other side of the country. He had so much time. We'll never be able to find all his victims. There's no way. Now, there is some folklore that goes along with this story, but I was really thinking about making that its own episode. So if you guys would like to know about the folklore and just some of that extra stuff, let me know. Please let me know. You can go to the Facebook page and let me know if you guys would like that. You don't have to post it as a comment. You can send me a message. You can send me a private message, and I will actually read it, and I'll get back to you and let you know what we can do on that. You can do the same thing with any suggestions of any stories that you have. But yeah, guys, I really appreciate you guys listening to me rant about this one, because this one, I do apologize for the length. So this one had a lot, and I left a lot out because I don't want to go into extreme detail about crime scenes, especially in this situation, because they died with no respect. And I want to ensure that they get that respect, at least from me. So I realize that they are gone now, but they still deserve that respect. Him, not so much. I'm sorry. I do not feel sorry for him. I kind of feel like his death was poetic justice, because I cannot imagine what those poor girls went through and what he put them through. And even the two that were able to get away from him, which, thank God for that, because there's no telling what he would have done to them. And I hope that they were able to get a lot of help with that, because I know that would cause a lot of PTSD and a lot of issues. And I hope they were able to find help to get them through that, because I just can't even imagine. But yeah, guys, the podcast is doing great. We're not even 2 full months in, and I'm proud of it. I have over 50 followers on several different platforms. I have been listened to almost 300 times, and I'm impressed, and I am very grateful, and I appreciate you guys letting me do this, because I enjoy this. This is fun for me. I enjoy reading about these things and getting to put my 2 cents in on some of these cases. But other than that, I'll end with, you can find the podcast, should be able to find the podcast, let me rephrase that, wherever you listen to podcasts. So you should be able to find it on Stitcher, Amazon, Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio. That's a new one. I've gotten a platform up for that now. And Apple Podcasts. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, stay true and whatnot. Bye.